Hi, thank you. Thank you, Arlen, and welcome to everyone. I trust you guys can hear me well. If you can, just type a one in the chat. Oh, a thumbs up. Good. I can see you. Wonderful. Got at least one. So I know that I can begin. Well, the title of today's session is The Map to Successful Parent Engagement. And trust me, I do know how to spell. I really do. I chose map with two P's um, because Karen Mapp is the author of the framework that we're going to look at today, and her name is spelled with two P's. So that's what we're going to do. So let's begin by playing a little game of agree or disagree. A statement will appear on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to either type agree or disagree as it relates to parent engagement. Parental involvement leads to improved student academic outcomes. Agree or disagree? All right, I've got a bunch of agrees. Looks like we're all on the same page here. In fact, research does indicate that parental involvement leads to successful and improved student outcomes, believe it or not. So, got another one for you. That one was easy. Let's check this one out. Students with more involved parents are more likely to have fun, enjoy school, have high self-esteem, and perceive school as a satisfying experience. Agree or disagree? All right, you guys are batting 1,000. You are absolutely right. Research does show, not just research in the United States, but research from across the world shows that when parents are more involved in school, students embrace school and school activities more, and they feel more comfortable in school environments. All right, let's see. I've got two more for you. Homework help is an important aspect of parent involvement, which leads to improved student academic outcomes. Agree or disagree? Okay, I think, okay, people are starting to populate the chat. Agree? Well, I may have tricked you on that one with a little bit of my language. While homework help is an important part of parental engagement and involvement, research shows that due to a variety of factors, it does not always lead to improved student academic outcomes. In fact, in some cases, it leads to lower student academic outcomes. Blew my mind with that one, but that's what the research is saying. All right. Lots of variables that go into that one. Finally, parent involvement should move beyond parent-teacher conferences and open houses. Absolutely. We're not even going to wait for everybody to weigh in on this one, but agree. We've got to take that next step. And today, I'm your facilitator. I'm going to support you in taking that next step. And just a little bit about me. Um, I'm the founder of Clavon, Byrd and Associates, and in that work, I'm an instructional coach. I'm a leadership coach. I'm a consultant, and I work with schools and school leaders anywhere from K to 16 in helping them meet their goals and achieve their outcomes as they relate to either leadership or student growth. In many past lives, I have had the following roles. I have been the chair of teacher education at a university, an associate professor at a university. I had a long tenure as a principal. I was a teacher, and at the heart of it all, I'm a parent as well. So I've been on both sides of parent involvement and trying to build capacity on both sides. So that helps frame sort of where I'm coming from today. Today, in the 1 hour that we've got, we're going to take a 10,000-foot view of building dual capacity according to Mapp's framework. We aren't going to have the opportunity today to dig as far down as I'd like, but we will spend some time in our workshops, in our workshop today, using the Google Doc that I sent over to you to help self-assess, analyze what's going on in our school communities. So we're going to get a little bit lower than 10,000 feet, but I don't know that we'll go much lower. Okay. So here's our agenda for today. We've got our agree or disagree activity, and then we've got the MAPS dual capacity building framework, where I walk through each component of the framework. And as a workshop, after I define and provide examples of each component of the framework, you'll have a moment to self-assess and have a moment to assess where you are in your school communities as it relates to this work. So let's dive right in. We don't have much time today. So let's talk a little bit about the dual capacity building framework for family and school partnerships. I'm going to let you take a look at it first. So just take a minute and review it, try to figure out what components exist, how the components might go together. Hello to you, Assad. So everyone take a moment to do that. So as you're looking, you'll notice that there are really four big pieces to this framework. One is the challenge, and I'm going to go into detail on each of these um, areas, but one is the challenge that we all face as school leaders, as participants in school communities, as parents. There's an inherent challenge there. Then there are essential conditions that should be in place if we're going to build dual capacity, okay? And then, of course, there are policy and program goals. And what leads all of this are the outcomes. What do we want as a result of working in this space? So this is the traditional model of the framework. I'm going to um, let Karen Mapp tell you a little bit about her work first before I dive in and try to explain it, but let's hear from her. And if someone could, I just want to make sure that once the video starts, if you're able to hear the sound pretty well and effectively, just type a 1 in the chat. If you can't, type a 0.
The first version of the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family School Partnership was launched at the 2014 Family and Community Engagement Conference held by the Institute for Educational Leadership. This research-based framework was authored in collaboration with the United States Department of Education and published by the Southwest Educational Development Lab. The framework was created to offer a tool for educators, policymakers, families, and community members to understand what's needed to cultivate and sustain partnerships between home and school that support student achievement and school improvement. Since 2014, I've gathered information from current research and from stakeholders about what was useful and what improvements were needed to the framework. Stakeholders suggested that they wanted the new framework to reflect a sense of growth and improvement, and that educators and families come together by building the capacity of each side to work in deeper partnership. Second, the framework needed to more clearly articulate the challenges that got in the way of partnership between families and educators. For example, the new framework points out that many educators have not been exposed to excellent practice, and that's often because they simply haven't received any training in this area. Many families haven't been exposed to excellent practice either, and many have had negative experiences in school, both when they were children and as adults. The way forward starts with the essential conditions, which includes both the process and organizational conditions. These are the nuts and bolts that are a part of any effective family and community engagement practice. The process conditions describe the key components of effective practice to build partnership, and the organizational conditions describe the systems and structures, in other words, the infrastructure needed to support and sustain partnership. One thing that the field stated loud and clear is that all partnerships have to start with trust. We know from the research of Tony Bragg and Barbara Schneider how important relational trust between families and educators is to the effective functioning of a school and to the building of dependable partnerships among the adults. So this was moved to the top of the list in the process conditions. The organizational conditions set the table for the effective execution of the process conditions. The next section highlights the type of growth we should see when all the essential conditions are met. These 4 C's are based on research from my colleague Monica Higgins. We all hear that term capacity building, but what does it actually mean? We know it's important for both sides to improve their knowledge and skills to engage in partnership. But Monica informs us that that's not the only element of capacity building that's important. Who you know, who you can turn to for information, is also an important part of capacity. We have research that reveals that our beliefs and values shift in positive ways as a result of working with others. Last but not least, the confidence of our families and educators to be able to do this work of partnership grows. And finally, in this last section, we see what happens when educators and families build their capacity to work in partnership with each other. We now have a reciprocal exchange that speaks to the power of both families and educators to support each other's continued growth. Educators connect family engagement to their day-to-day work with students and see families as contributors to their children's education. Families engage in various ways that make a big difference for their children's learning. And at the end of the day, we're able to see that this work truly helps us get to the outcome we're all striving for: more effective partnerships that support student and school improvement.
All right. So as Mapp details, it's a dual capacity framework, which means that the capacity of staff in schools as well as the capacity of families must grow together, right? We can't assume that one of those entities, either parents or schools, has a higher capacity. We've got to grow together, right? So in doing so, I am going to offer this version of the Mapp framework. More, instead of a horizontal version, I'm going to offer a little bit more of a top-down version that starts with the challenge and ultimately ends with the family and staff capacity outcomes. Same information, just a little easier way to view it, in my opinion. Okay, so let's begin with the challenge. What does this look like? Many schools struggle with how to cultivate and sustain those positive relationships that we're all looking for with families. Historically, family engagement has been one of the weakest areas of compliance across schools. I know that that was true when I was a teacher. It was true when I was a principal. We always struggled with the idea of how do we better engage families as meaningful partners. I think maybe our struggle with this issue is rooted in the idea that many schools view family engagement as compliance. to district, state, and federal policies, as opposed to being rooted as an essential part of the overall school program. In my experience, educators have a very strong desire to work with families. And when I say families, I mean all families, to develop those strong homeschool connections that we're all looking for. Because what we really want to garner are those really strong student outcomes. That's what we're all looking for. However, they don't always know how to accomplish this, right? So, why is that true? I think that's true because many teacher preparation and principal ed leadership preparation programs don't always broach the subject of meaningful parent involvement, not explicitly, sometimes implicitly, but not explicitly, right? Those are not always part of the pathway to educator licensure. In turn, families may face personal, cultural, structural barriers. This isn't new to you, right? In engaging these professional partnerships with teachers in schools. Let's face it, schools can be really complex places for some parents. And if we're even honest with ourselves, for some teachers as well. Very difficult to navigate for some people. This is compounded by the fact that if parents have had negative experiences with schools up to the point that they become parents, the barrier to meaningful engagement only widens. It only gets deeper, right? Thus, both schools and families have been put in a situation where they know family involvement is crucial to student success, but neither party knows how to start the conversation. Neither party knows how to initiate the engagement process meaningfully, that is. Each participant is left with the idea that somebody else needs to do it. School personnel believe families should be more actively engaged in school. I have not been part of a school community yet. In my 27 years as an educator, 20 years in the pre-K through 12 space, I have yet to be part of a school community that does not believe that families should be more engaged in school. And so in doing so, as school communities, we point the finger at the families and say, you guys get involved. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, the families are pointing the fingers back at us and saying, invite us, get us in here in a meaningful way. Schools can be intimidating. Help us help our students, right? So the limited capacity of each party must be addressed if we're going to execute family partnerships in a meaningful way. So in practice, lack of opportunities for schools and parents to build the capacity for partnerships looks a lot like dysfunction in the school space. Parents and families minimally engage with one another, maybe with parent-teacher conferences, open house, a curriculum night here or there, a school concert here or there, something along those lines, chaperoning field trips, etc. There is little trust between schools and families, yet they share the development of the children. So let's take a few moments to map your specific challenge individually. So what I want you to do is use the dual capacity building framework, Google Doc that I sent over, and I want you to describe the specific challenges your school community faces from the educator perspective as well as from the family perspective. So I'm going to switch over now so that you guys know what I'm talking about. And I think I'll pull up this version of it. Sure, let's do that. Okay, so in this version, we're looking at the challenge section, which is the top section, okay? And what I'd like you to do is describe the specific challenges that your school community faces. One from the educator perspective and as well as from the family perspective. Let's take a couple of minutes to sort of think those through. It's okay if we don't completely finish today. We have limited time, but just start thinking about it. What are those challenges? I'll give you 2 minutes. Roughly 1 minute. Arlen, I don't know if you're there, but someone came in and needs a reshare of the document. Are you able to share that with them, or do you need me to do it?
I'll put it in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, try to finish up this portion of what you've come up with so far. You're starting to identify your challenge, and part of the reason we want to do that is it sets the table in front of us. We know what we're dealing with when we understand what challenges we face, and then we can build from there. So let's get into the next part of the framework. And these are the opportunity conditions. The opportunity conditions consist of process conditions and organizational conditions. So now that we understand the challenge ahead of us, we've got to build this meaningful capacity to build partnerships with our families. And now we can begin the process of identifying what opportunities we have for partnership based on the way that our schools and our communities are structured. Research suggests that certain process conditions must be met if the adult participants, both the parents, family members, and the staff at schools, are to come away with a new learning experience, not only with new knowledge, but with the ability to desire to apply what they've learned. Additionally, important organizational conditions must be met. These organizational conditions help scale and sustain the efforts, right? And I think over the years, if you've been in education for any number of years, we've had some just powerful, amazing ideas that were even scaled up and able to be used, across multiple schools and districts, classrooms, etc. Sometimes the difficulty comes with sustaining those initiatives. So if we want to scale and sustain the initiatives, we have to think about what organizational conditions exist. So I'm going to start first by further describing the process conditions. So let's begin there. Process refers to just like a series of actions or steps or procedures that we'll use to lift the initiative off the ground, whatever it may be, right? So we'll begin with this idea because process conditions are the key to the design of effective initiatives. We have to understand these first. This is like the cornerstone or the linchpin to this dual capacity framework, okay? So process conditions must be one, linked to learning, and by that I mean aligned to learning goals for students, families, and school staff. When that is done, all of those entities are more likely to be motivated to meaningfully participate, right? If staff understands that these process conditions are linked to learning and that this initiative is aligned with learning goals, they're going to be a little bit more motivated to participate. They have to be relational. You heard Karen Mapp talk about trust and respect. We've got to work toward building respectful and trusting relationships between home and school. Participants in initiatives are more willing to learn from others whom they respect and they trust. Just a quick reminder for me is I'm reminded of how important trust is whenever I make a major purchase, right? It's the cornerstone of any relationship. Additionally, in a transactional relationship, when I'm making a purchase of a vehicle or a home or something like that, and I just wonder, is there anyone out there like me who will not make a major purchase from a salesperson that I don't have a sense of trust in? I've got to be able to know that this person will support me and that this person has my back, so to speak. This concept applies to the two-way trust that needs to be built between school staff and families as well. Think about the work that teachers and principals and school leaders are doing with children on a daily basis. And families have to have trust that the right steps are being taken for the child's education. And likewise, school staff has to have trust that families will continue to partner and that families will be meaningful partners. The shared trust between home and school is the foundation of shared learning and responsibility. When we talk about developmental process conditions, we're talking about the fact that many initiatives focus on building the intellectual, social, and human capital of school employees and families. When we speak of developmental initiatives, we really think about empowerment, where school staffs and families are empowered to be confident, empowered to be active, empowered to be informed about what's going on in the school, in the community, at home, and how all of that works together to meet the school's outcomes. Collective or collaborative process conditions involve bringing families and staff together for shared learning in collective environments that foster peer learning and communication networks among families and among staff. The collaboration of these initiatives builds social networks and connections. So with collaborative, we're coming together in a shared space. We're learning in a shared space. We're learning together, helping to build that dual capacity. Finally, process conditions have to be interactive. When I think back of many, and when I think back on many of the family engagement strategies that I've seen schools offer along the years, a lot of times it's a big laundry list of activities for parents or families to check off. It may have come from the district office or from the principal or someone, and there's a laundry list for teachers and a laundry list for parents. Those are all well and good, but they represent very low-level learning for staff and families. For deeper learning opportunities, all adults, staff, and families need to have the opportunity to practice what they've learned. This isn't new to you as educators. We need practice to get better at what we do, right? We also need to receive meaningful feedback, timely feedback, and we must have coaching. Coaching from each other, coaching from peers, coaching from facilitators of the workshop, etc. Right? So there's that idea that they have to be interactive. All right. So before we move on to organizational conditions, think of the 5 process conditions and which one is really speaking to you right now in terms of the space where you work on a daily basis. Is it linked to learning, relational, etc.? Type that in the chat. And when I see a few of them, we'll move on. Okay. So a couple of relationals and an interactive. Let's switch our attention over to organizational conditions. So the goal is for family community partnerships to be scaled up and sustained over time. Remember, in education, a lot of the issue is we can scale them, but we just can't sustain them, right? So in doing so, initiatives have to be systemic, meaning they have to be intentionally designed as important components of a school's success. It has to be part of the school improvement plan. It has to be part of the strategic plan of the school. It has to be out front, out center, for everybody to know and everybody to understand and everybody to be aware of. There has to be systems built around it. Okay. They have to be integrated. A key process, uh, organizational condition, excuse me, is integration. So capacity building efforts and initiatives are ingrained in the school structures and processes. They're ingrained in professional development. They're ingrained in how we roll out curriculum, how we choose curriculum, etc. In other words, as I said earlier, these initiatives require intentionality. Got to be very intentional about how we roll them out. Well, when we talk about sustain, and I've talked about that a couple of times already in the short time we've been together, I'm just going to refer to the phrase follow the money to understand whether or not a capacity building initiative has been prioritized for sustainability. If budget funds are allotted to the success in the budget cycle, and we're not just relying on, hopefully we'll get a grant, hopefully someone will make a donation, hopefully, hopefully. If we're not relying on hopefully, there's a great chance that this organizational condition will help the initiative sustain over time. But if we're in that constant mode of hope, well, we know how that may turn out, right? We have a frugal, hopeful attitude toward the effort. The budget dollars just aren't there to support it, and it may be difficult to achieve sustainability. So let's go back to our Google Doc now, and let's take a few moments to map the opportunities available at your school to meet process and organizational conditions. This is super important to have these in place before we can launch, before we can make that lift of having that dual capacity, those dual capacity learning opportunities. These conditions must be met. So for the sake of time, write some ideas about how one of your current school family partnership initiatives could be reimagined to include one process condition and one organizational condition. So you're looking for something that does not currently exist within the current family partnership initiative. Maybe it's an activity, maybe it's an event, maybe it's a series of activities. I want you to write or reimagine so that one process condition exists and one organizational condition exists. Take about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Yeah, 45 seconds. All right. Let's interact in the chat here. As I sort of go through each of these conditions again, whether process or organizational. Um, if I am calling out the condition that you reimagined as used to reimagine at your school community, type of one in the chat. So how many spoke to aligning the initiative with learning goals? Okay, let's see many there. Looks like we're beyond that, right? What about trust? Building trust between families and schools. All right, I see Kara there. What about developmental? Anyone there? All right, I see a few coming in on there. Collaborative, type of one, if you focused on collaboration. What about interactivity? Okay. Systemic, integrated, sustained. All right, let's move on. Let's get to the next section of our framework. And we're doing pretty well with time. So let's talk about policy and program goals. In many schools, family engagement initiatives sort of have this top-down authoritarian air about themselves. We teach families how to engage more effectively in their children's education without treating them as partners. It's more of a do this, do this, do this, right? Often this leaves families discouraged and feeling disenfranchised as they view the school as unwelcoming. Policies and programs directed at improving family engagement must focus on building the capacity side by side of both staff and families. Mapp's framework utilizes the 4 C's to accomplish this task. Let's talk about the 4 C's. First C is capabilities. On one hand, school staff needs to understand the funds of knowledge available in the communities where they work. They have to know which assets the families are bringing to the school community, right? Often they may not be what we view as traditional assets related to school. We've got to open our mindsets a little bit more using the funds of knowledge approach. School staff need skills and cultural competency and building trust with families. Again, this isn't always taught in teacher preparation. It's not always taught in ed leadership courses. So we've got to find other avenues to build those skills and cultural competency. What do families need? They need access to knowledge about student learning. They may need access to knowledge about navigating the school system. We've already talked about how school systems can be somewhat difficult places to navigate sometimes, even for teachers, especially beginning teachers and beginning principals. Families may need skills in advocacy and educational support. The second C represents connections. Staff and families need access to social capital. Got to build strong networks. We have to build those networks of families, teachers, family-teacher relationships, family-family relationships, teacher-teacher relationships. All of those help strengthen the connections within the school and help the school go out and build connections with community agencies and community services. There has to be a free flow of connection between all of those entities. Finally, we've got confidence. Staff and families need a sense of comfort and self-efficacy related to engaging in partnership activities and working across lines of cultural difference. This is both sides. Staff and families need to feel comfortable and confident uh, in knowing that they're engaging in these opportunities. And many times we're going across multiple lines of culture. We're going to do that. But there has to be some relative confidence in doing so. My fourth C is cognition. Staff, and when I talk about cognition, I'm really talking about beliefs. I'm talking about attitudes, right? Dispositions. Staff has to be committed to working with families as partners. We have to be committed and embrace the idea that our families are 50-50 partners in education with us. Staff must believe in the value of this partnership. And that goes back to the funds of knowledge and understanding what families bring to the table. Families have to view themselves as partners as well. They can't just leave it all to the school. We've heard that many times. We've heard that, well, I'm the parent, you're the school, you teach, I don't really know anything about that. And we've seen that across multiple different communities, regardless of socioeconomic status, etc. That seems to be the prevailing view sometimes. Families must be willing to take on various roles in the partnership, right? So that means families can take on the role of learner, but they can also take on the role of teacher, right? As they teach the school staff about their communities, as they teach the school staff about the ins and outs of their communities. So let's take a few moments to rate your school or your classroom on implementation of the 4 Cs. We're going to revert now back to our self-assessment Google Doc. And what I'd like you to do is rate the current condition at your school, right? The current or your classroom, if that's what it is, of each of the 4 Cs on a Likert scale from 1 to 5. A score of 1 indicates very little implementation. A score of 5 indicates very healthy implementation. Then I want you to take a moment to describe why you made the rating that you made. So let's give 2 minutes for this task. One minute, actually less than 1 minute. Okay, finish up that prevailing thought in your mind. And let's move to the final stage of the framework, and that's capacity outcomes. I call it the final stage, but it's the ideal state. It's where we begin in our minds. It's what we initially think about when we engage in work in this space. And it's what all of the work gears toward, right? So let's talk a little bit about school outcomes, okay, staff outcomes. And what I'd like you to do, and I want you to utilize the chat for this as I talk a little bit about what what school staff should be able to do. I want you to think about what does that look like at your school? What might you see um, in reality of each of these capacity, or not each, of any of these capacity outcomes? What words or phrases might you hear in a school building that is meeting these outcomes, right? So either what will you see or what words or phrases will you hear, trying to to get to a real state for you. So school and program staff who can honor and recognize families' funds of knowledge. Honor and recognize what families are bringing to the table and view them as strengths, view them as gold in terms of what you need to know to be able to support the students in your school. Staff who can connect family engagement to student learning. That's what we're all here for, right? We've realized that the job is it's big. It's big, and it's actually too big for just school staff to accomplish, right? So you've got to connect family engagement to student learning. Staff who can create welcoming and inviting cultures. So what does that look like in your school, in your ideal situation, any of those three bullet points? Which phrases might you hear if these actions are taking place? Please type in the chat. Says, welcome, exclamation point, welcome with a smile. I would love to hear what you think. Wow. That sort of capacity works for everyone, doesn't it? Doesn't that work from staff to family? Doesn't that work from staff to student? Doesn't that work from principal to teacher or teacher to principal? I think we all want to hear that on a daily basis, right? Camellia says we are partners in the success of our, all caps, students and staff. Alfred says he's going to see positive interactions between staff to staff, staff to parents, parents to parents. Okay. All right. Let's move on to families who can negotiate multiple roles. They can be supporters. They can support the um, overall academic program of the school. They can support the classroom management and classroom culture within their children's classrooms. They can support that, right? They can be encouragers. And initially we think that they're encouragers for their students, but they can be encouragers to staff as well, right? Because remember, families know the children best, right? They can monitor, they can be advocates, they can be decision makers. And I know that there are federal, state, and district policies, which says parents in most of our states, right, which says that parents must be part of the decision making of the school. But I've been in situations where that has just sort of been like a checklist, rubber stamp sort of situation. We want parents to really be decision makers in the school. We want them to have the confidence and the knowledge to understand what decision needs to be made and to participate in the decision making as it ultimately affects their children. And we want them to be collaborators. Okay. So, what does that look like in your school situation if we've got families who are doing these things? Or what phrases might you hear in your school if this is happening? Go ahead and type into the chat what you may see or what you may hear. I know you're still thinking. Take a few more seconds. Some of these have been sent to just hosts and panelists, not to everyone. But Angela says she might observe parents engaged in discussions to approve a school budget or even evaluate the principal. Kathy says she'd see continued collaboration throughout the year, not just at specific times. So true. Both of you, both Angela and Kathy. Well, as our hour is coming to an end, we have to be thinking, now what? We've got this framework, and this framework is not, the pieces of it aren't really new to us, right? We may have been working on different pieces of this at a time, but we haven't really, in a lot of cases, put all the pieces together like Mapp has done for us. Okay, so what do we do next? Essentially, we continue to work, right? We continue to assess our school's efforts. We continue to dissect each of our parent involvement initiatives or activities, and we dissect them for the challenge, the opportunity conditions, and the policy and program goals across the 4 Cs. Then we share our work with the family involvement team, or if one does not exist, we try to establish a family engagement team. We connect with our students' families, maybe through a survey or just through informal data, to develop at least one parent involvement initiative that meets the 4 Cs, right? We try to now look at the work that we do through the 4 Cs. And then we add more parent involvement initiatives. We start with one because the old adage says, how do you eat something really large? One bite at a time, right? So we continue to add as we develop our capacity and our parents and our families develop capacity, we continue to add parent engagement activities. And then finally, we diversify our dual capacity building initiatives to strengthen partnerships with more families, because what we've outlined may just be on the MTSS scale, the multi-tiered systems of support. It may just be the universal stage, right? Then we'll have to get to the tier 2 and the tier 3 stages to support all families. So our time is up. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please reach out to me at this email address, Clavon at cbyrdandassociates.com, and we could talk more about this.
All right, Clavon, thank you so much for sharing all this great information around parent and community involvement with our schools. Such an important topic. We really appreciate you being here. Thanks to all of our participants as well for engaging in the chat, and hopefully you had a chance to complete the handout as well. That is a nice piece for you to take back. If you have any questions for Clavon, you can type them into the chat right now. We've got about 1 more minute before we close out. So any final words of encouragement or questions for Clavon, you can enter those now into the chat. And Clavon, I hope you can see all the kudos and thank yous you're getting into the chat right now. Don't see any questions yet, but a lot of good feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Arlen.
All right, I'm going to stop the webinar recording.